Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a Criminally Basic podcast. I'm Megan,
And I'm Hannah.
and today I went down a rabbit hole of a case that I've known about
Hmm.
for a little while, but I never really analyzed until it popped up on YouTube for me a few days ago.
Honestly, those are the best kind of cases.
Right? I've been really interested in YouTube channels that analyze interrogation footage and actually break down the different techniques that investigators use in order to get a suspect talking. I think it's absolutely fascinating.
Megan, I think we're watching the same channels.
The one that I saw this particular case on is called JCS Criminal Psychology. Highly recommend. Go watch. I'm not going to be breaking down this case like
Hmm.
those YouTube channels do,
Hmm.
but I do really want to tell this story because I think it's an important one to tell. So, Hannah, have you ever heard of the term tiger parenting?
I don't believe I have.
So, according to an article from the American Psychological Association written by Soo-Young Kim, tiger parenting is a form of authoritarian parenting where the parent exhibits both positive and negative parenting techniques. So, positive meaning like warm, comforting, and supporting, and negative being like overly strict rules and shaming. The term was popularized in 2011 when Amy Chua, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I looked up how to pronounce that and I saw several different sources. They kind of all pronounce it differently, so forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. So, Amy is a Yale law professor. She published a book titled Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, in which she describes the parenting of her two daughters. And I remember when this came out because there was like an absolute frenzy surrounding it because it describes her really, really strict, harsh, and in my opinion, at times abusive parenting. Her daughters excel in academics and music, and she attributes this to her parenting style, which includes no grades below an A, no playdates, no sleepovers, no TV, no video games. Even though I don't think there's anything wrong with having certain expectations for your kids, I don't think it's right to call your child, quote, garbage and threaten to burn their toys, which is a
No,
situation Amy talks about in her book.
I feel like, I'm no psychology expert here, but I feel like that would bring some issues, such as making your children have to walk on eggshells around you.
Seriously, yeah. So there was, like this big uproar in 2011 about it, but just like you brought up, it made a lot of people concerned about the long-term effects of this style of parenting on the child. While not every child will do what the subject of today's episode did to her parents, the article I previously mentioned by Soo-Young Kim mentions that children raised in this overly strict way typically averaged a lower GPA than students with supportive parents. I do want to say that this is not the way that the majority of Asian parents raise their children. It's a very small subset. I don't believe it just originates with parents of Asian descent. I think that this can be a parenting technique that anybody of any ethnicity
Yeah.
can do and can subject their kids to.
I think that's making for some bad emotional health issues in the future.
Right, exactly. I don't have any problem with parents setting expectations for their children and even having some rather strict rules in their household.
But there is a very big difference between strict and abuse.
Yes, absolutely. So, with that being said, let's meet the subject of today's episode, Jennifer Pan. Born in 1986 in Canada, Jennifer, her younger brother Felix, and her parents, the mother named Bick and the father Han, lived in a nice house on a quiet suburban street. To the Pans, Jennifer was the perfect child, the result of hard lives lived in order to make a better future for their children. Han was born in Vietnam and moved to Canada as a political refugee, so the pressure he put on his children to excel came from a place of, I've had to work hard to get here, so you're going to work hard to deserve it.
And I don't think installing the effort of working hard is a bad thing.
No, I think that instilling a good work ethic within your children is a really important part of parenting, but again, it can kind of go too far.
Yes.
Han was described as more of the stereotypical tiger parent as opposed to his wife. According to an article for Toronto Life by Karen Ho, who is actually a former classmate of Jennifer's, they would always pick her up from school, they monitored her extracurricular activities, didn't allow her to go to school dances or parties, and outlawed boyfriends until after college. She was allowed to go to sleepovers, but according to Karen, her parents would drop her off late at night and pick her up early the next morning. Last one there, first one to leave. By age 22, she hadn't even gone out of town without her parents and had never been to a club with her friends.
I'm not saying let your kids go wild, but don't shelter them to that extent.
Right. I mean, I can kind of, I guess, sympathize with part of this. Like, I didn't have the most strict parents in the world, but there
Yeah.
were, certain expectations that we had to follow. The sleepover thing kind of resonated with me a little bit because I was always the first one to be picked up from sleepovers,
Mm-hmm.
and I hated it. But I guess here with the parenting styles that Hannah, you and I kind of grew up with, this seems very foreign to us.
I mean, I wasn't allowed to go to like parties, but like I was allowed to go to school dances and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same here. The pressure to be perfect at first seemed to be working. Jennifer showed a lot of promise in figure skating from a really young age, and by 14, she had her sights set on the 2010 Winter Olympics. However, at age 14, she tore a ligament in her knee and had to quit. Then, all of the pressure was on her academics. According to an article from the Washington Post by Yanan Wong, she made mostly B's and then C's and then failing grades as she got older. Since this was unacceptable to her parents, she forged her report cards. Around this time, the pressure from her parents was so immense that she started to self harm in order to give herself an outlet. Faking her report cards turned into faking a high school diploma, when in reality she had dropped out when she failed calculus and couldn't graduate. Forging grades in high school continued in college. When her parents thought she was at class, she was actually hanging out at the library or at a cafe or with her secret boyfriend, Daniel Wong. She even moved in with Daniel and his parents for 3 days a week, saying that she was living with a female friend so she wouldn't have to make the long commute for her early and late classes on those days, when in reality those classes weren't happening.
I'm very surprised that they even let her do that.
I am too, and I read in a few places that really it was her mother that convinced her father that that was a good idea. She had a pretty long commute in the mornings and, in the
Mm,
evenings when she was coming home, and on the days when she said she was going to be staying with this friend, she said it was because, she had really, really early classes or she was there really, really late and didn't want to make
yeah,
that commute.
yeah.
Eventually, though, Jennifer's lies caught up with her. According to Jennifer in an interview with police, her father had phoned one of her friends to make sure she was with her. Actually, the friend who she said that she was staying with. And unfortunately, that friend, who had been woken up by this phone call and answered it, groggy and sleepy, forgot what day it was and said that Jennifer wasn't there. This led to her father finding out that Jennifer, who was 23 or 24 at the time, didn't have the blooming career in medicine he thought she did. From there, Jennifer, who was an adult at this point, had her life turned upside down. Her father threatened to kick her out, but her mother convinced him to let her stay. According to the article by Karen Ho, quote, they took away her cell phone and laptop for 2 weeks, after which she was only permitted to use them in her parents' presence and had to endure surprise checks of her messages. They forbade her from seeing Daniel. They ordered her to quit all of her jobs because she did have a few jobs here and there in order to make money, except for teaching piano, and began tracking the odometer on her car. End quote.
At least she was working and trying to do something.
Yeah, I mean, she did have a couple of part-time jobs because, she at one point said that she had a job. She said that she
Yeah.
had graduated college and that she was working at, I believe, Sick Kids Hospital in
Hmm.
Toronto. So, she had to be making money somehow.
Yeah.
At this point, Jennifer had had enough. She described living in her home as being on house arrest. She was angry at her parents for everything and blamed them for all of her problems. So, she started concocting a plan to remedy her situation. That plan did not include completing the calculus class she needed in order to get her high school diploma. It didn't include applying to college. It didn't include becoming a pharmacist like her father wanted. November 8th, 2010 was normal. Her mom went line dancing, her dad stayed in and read the news, Jennifer watched TV upstairs in her bedroom. That is, until just after 10, when 3 armed men entered the house through the unlocked front door. They demanded money, after which they led Jennifer's parents to the basement and shot them both. Jennifer, who was tied to a banister upstairs, called 911, and you can actually find this 911 call on the internet. The cops showed up to find her mother, Bick, dead, but her father was miraculously still alive. Actually, in the 911 call, you can hear him calling for Jennifer after
Oh,
waking up and finding his wife dead next to him. In police interviews after the incident, Jennifer stuck to that story that 3 unknown assailants had broken in, had demanded money, and when they didn't get what they wanted, shot her parents, but somehow, for some reason, let her live. She stuck to that story at first. Then, when the evidence didn't add up, she changed her story that she wanted to kill herself, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. So she hired a hitman to come in and kill her, but something went wrong and her parents were the victims instead. Finally, after being confronted with all of the evidence, the truth came out. She had planned the whole thing with her boyfriend in order to free herself from her parents' tyrannical reign. It's difficult from our perspective, I
mhm.
think, to understand why she didn't just leave. Why
Yeah,
she didn't just cut off contact from her parents and, move in with her boyfriend full time, get her own job, make her own money. But I think that, we're coming from a place of not really understanding the pressure that comes
true.
with that kind of lifestyle. I am definitely not condoning what Jennifer did. I think
No,
what she
not at
did
all.
was evil and horrible.
Oh, it was terrible, absolutely.
Right. I mean, how do you get to the point where you think that your
Murder's
parents,
your only option.
yeah, that your parents being dead is the only way that you're going to get out of that situation? I will say that part of the motive for this was getting the money that would have come with her parents being dead. I
Mhm.
saw one place, and I'm not going to quote the source because it was only one source, and I don't really trust where I saw it, but said that it was around $500,000,
Oh,
which, would have been more than enough to start a new life
yeah.
with the man that she said she loved. Both of her parents were shot, but because her father survived, he was able to prove that she wasn't tied up to the banister like she said she was. She was up and walking around during the whole thing. That is until she called 911 and, was able to make that 911 call. Although that is disputed whether she was actually ever tied up at all, but that's just details at this point.
Yeah.
I saw in an interview with her father where he talked about losing pretty much his whole family. Jennifer's brother Felix wasn't home at the time. He also lived in the house, but that evening he was out. I believe he was studying or something. He did not have the same strict rules that Jennifer did because he did, follow their parents' wishes and was studying engineering at a nearby college. Jennifer would end up being charged, tried, and convicted of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for 25 years and is still in prison to this day.
I think she should be there, not gonna
I
lie.
think so too. The 3 men who were her accomplices are also in prison. They got the same sentence as she did, first degree without the possibility of parole for 25 years. I think that's fair for all of
Yeah.
them.
Who was the men? That's what I forget.
So there were 3 of them. It was the boyfriend and 2 of his friends. I think at the end of the day, we can all agree that this is a really tragic case that I think makes you sympathize with the perpetrator a little bit. What she did was not okay at all.
Yeah.
I'm not condoning murder, but I'm also not condoning the way in which, I'm not condoning the pressure that her parents put on her to be perfect and that made her feel as though she had to lie in order to keep their approval. Thank you all for listening to A Criminally Basic Podcast. If you'd like to learn more, you can find us at A Criminally Basic Podcast on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.
And check out our sources as well as photos on our website, www.acriminallybasicpodcast.podbean.com.
Thanks for listening.